Hey, how are you?
Very good, very good.
Good, good, lovely.
I think we are going to be live, or we're live with
Looks
Christina.
like we're live. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really funny because last time we had a little chit chat with Ceci and on the panel, and it's all over YouTube now, so it's great. We just have this. Yeah,
Okay. Great.
okay,
Well,
we're live. Mark, hello, nice to see you, my friend. It's been a few months actually, no?
yeah, it's been mucho tiempo.
Yeah, mucho tiempo. So everybody, welcome. Today we have a very good and special guest, it's Mark. Um, he's actually one of the great talents that we have in Barcelona City, and is running a number of different incredible innovations. And so, Mark, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks. That's I think you've already grossly overstated my value to
Yeah.
the city or anybody else, but thanks. No, so I my name is Mark Binger. Originally actually grown up a lot of different places, but spent most of my time growing up in the United States and then a lot of my adult life in Sweden. And then about 20 years I spent in San Francisco. And when I was in San Francisco, I was doing some consulting after I've been in a number of startups, either as a founder or as a management team, and had just exited a company in 2017, was looking for what I wanted to do next. So doing some consulting to sort of like scout around and see what was new and exciting. And I ended up on a project with Telefonica Alpha here in Barcelona. Alpha was their moonshot organization. So basically coming up with, 10-year from now, big ideas in food and health and energy and all kinds of things outside of telecom. So it was really exciting, but I also met some great people, including my co-founder, Cecilia Tam, who I believe was one of your previous speakers. And so she and I co-founded Futurity Studio a couple of years ago, and that has evolved into what is now Futurity Systems, which encompasses everything from like early stage ideation, let's scout for, what's on the 10, 20, 30, 50-year horizon, to let's put products and prototypes in the hands of real users. Let's do surveys. Let's kind of test those ideas and all the stuff in between.
Right. Really cool. So I'm gonna ask you some more questions. I'm gonna try to sort of help people also see how you landed in the interesting topics that you're in. So obviously your first part of your career could be interesting to hear a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I mean, it's almost like this is the second part of we have the session with Ceci, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is, you guys have created something that I find amazing. So Futurity, initially Studio, now Systems. Its task is to kind of help people bridge the gap between technologies and what the imagination can give, and almost like future telling, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is really, it's in one way esoteric. At the same time, it's you guys are you have a method, and one of the interesting things that we're seeing, right, it's this momentum where what is physical and digital starting to come together.
Yeah.
In the last conversation with Cecilia, we talked a little bit about what was Web3. We basically sort of gave a brief idea what metaverse as a concept is. She showed us the metaverse, right? But I think it goes beyond than that. And I mean, knowing you and having experienced your methods and ideas in terms of how to visualize the future and so on, what's your take? Tell us a little bit about the research that got you guys here. And how do you see these is actually affecting society's world and so on?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll start maybe in an abstract or theoretical and the broad how we do this and all kinds of things, and then maybe apply it to design, specifically interface and user design, because I think that's actually my life story here. So in general, it's said that if you want to understand the future, you need to look twice as far to the past. So if you need to think about 10 years into the future, you look 20 years back. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about or even explaining how technologies have evolved. So when we talk about Web 1, 2, and 3, it's not just because it's important that you know your history and stuff like that. It's because you're in a change right now. You just don't know that what we're thinking of right now is like this new world, you're going to look back and go like, oh, that was so cute and quaint. And, you know, the mistakes that have been made over and over again, like you can learn from those. And similarly, like the opportunities that you see, like they're facing you right now. You just need to have a sort of a context of how to understand those things. So, so we do a lot of really data-driven research on patents, on product launches, on trademarks, on things like that. So, you know, when was blah, 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 say the Trio smartphone, like, why was that not the iPhone? Why didn't the Trio become the iPhone? And so you look at like, well, when did it launch? How many people adopted it? What were its advantages and disadvantages? And how about the BlackBerry? Why did those guys, they were like top of the world and then they completely disappeared. So looking at these types of, you know, successes and failures historically gives you a much better sense, I think, of the now that we're in and designing around that. So my personal background. So when I was a kid, my dad worked at Xerox, and Xerox in the 70s made copiers and electric typewriters, and they were massively dominant. And like so you put a piece of paper on this machine and takes a picture of it and puts out another copy of that. And the reason that was such a big business is because the alternative of typing it was really expensive. Like a secretary listening to their boss say something and then typing up that letter, there's about $5 in 1960s and 1970s money. So let's say it cost you, probably 25 or 30 bucks to send an email. You wouldn't send very many emails, but these copiers, they basically automated that process. And some of their stuff went off patent. So they all of a sudden had all this competition from low cost, high quality Japanese competitors. And so they had to create a new business. What they created was the graphical user interface. So they created a computer that looked like a typewriter. Because now, so like a big cost when you're typing is you make a mistake. Now you got to type over the entire letter. With the computer, you could see what the letter was going to look like. You could make one change, you could change just the name, everything else is the same. So all of a sudden you have this automation thing. This is a $40,000 machine, and my dad brought it home so I could play with it.
Wow. Okay.
This is pre-Mac, and that's actually what happened. So this $40,000 machine, Steve Jobs and Wozniak went to visit Xerox, and they saw it and they're like, oh, that's amazing. Let's do that. So the Mac that came out a few years after that, this is, let's say 85, 83, anyway, that did what a $40,000 computer did. And it totally undermined the market for that computer and created, personal computing really the way we know it today. So when we look at the transition from text to GUI and then GUI to smartphones and smartphones to voice interfaces like Alexa and stuff like that, there are these similar patterns of you have a company that's very dominant. They've got 80, 90% market share. A new thing comes along, they dismiss it because it will undermine their business. And then that, in a 3 to 5 year period, it takes over and it dominates for the rest of that time. So Windows is still that for desktop computing. Android is that for mobile. We don't know what the interface for voice or VR or AR, what they're going to be, but because it's such a consistent pattern, it's something that we can predict with a high likelihood will happen.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I mean, first of all, wow, dude, that must be awesome to be able to experience the Xerox machine. I'm jealous. Mm-hmm. I learned about it later, and of course, there are movies and everything around this whole story of the computation. But it's really true. It was. If you think about it, now we're entering a strange situation when you see physical buildings and locations, stores actually being shutting down, banks completely disappearing.
Yeah,
a lot of sort of that physicality that exists is starting to disappear because online is swallowing it. But the need for human interaction, the need for exchange, for seeing things hasn't. So what's the trick here? And well, let's give me your opinion on that, and then I have a follow-up question already.
Okay. Yeah, well, so it's really interesting when a new platform comes out, it basically tries to emulate as closely as possible the thing it's trying to replace. So really, like if you look at the way that when Steve Jobs was running the interfaces for like the iPad and the iPhone, it was, you've probably heard this term skeuomorphic. It was trying, I mean, like if it was a book, it was going to be on a bookshelf. They have wood grain pattern. If it was the gaming thing, it looked like felt and stuff like that. And so I think there's a use for that, and it helps people understand what's going on, but it's also, it's very encumbering also. We don't really need all those cues anymore. And what's interesting, what happens is when we're more used to using the digital interface than the physical one, then we go to a completely different paradigm, right? So we still have some of these holdovers, like with Microsoft Word and paper clips, where you would attach thing, it looks like a typewriter. It's still a holdover from that time when we had those physical things. And now all the things that are making the Microsoft Office suite obsolete, they're not encumbered with that. So Google Sheets and just kind of, Notion and no code interfaces, like they don't need to think that way. So with the human experience, like having chatbots, they're trying to be like human in bank interfaces. Well, we aren't seeking that type of human connection. Right? Most of us are seeking human connection in a more social context. So we were talking earlier today with some students who were here about social shopping versus functional or utilitarian shopping. When you go to the store to buy milk, you don't like go with a bunch of friends. Oh, which milk do you like? And like, how does this milk look on me? And stuff, right? So they're actually just different things, but we used to treat them in the same way. And technology allows us to now separate those. So we can bring social functions into things where that would have been prohibitive before. We can have a lot more like entertainment things. And then we can just do the practical stuff, like just give it to a bot, give it to my digital assistant, and tell me if something's wrong, but otherwise fulfill my wishes.
Right. So, I mean, this is really interesting. I remember the first time I heard about the metaverse concept. That was before Facebook, rebranded themselves and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this perception that it's going to be like a Second Life. You remember Second Life?
Yeah.
And so we all thought, oh, okay, they're going to build this sort of Second Life world where we're going to all come in with our avatars and so on. And it's going to be, interesting. And then slowly I started to realize that it's actually not that. And I think that's probably this key framework example that you're giving, like the first attempts to digitize the real world was to make it like in 3D and people and avatars and so on and connections. But the form of digital gives you a completely new material to design and create futures and things that go beyond what's real. And I think that's the part where my mind goes like, phew. So my question is, I mean, you guys practice that. I mean, that I love what you're doing. I'm a huge fan of you guys and the work that you're doing, especially. And one of the things that most people do not understand is they don't even understand, first of all, what the metaverse is. They don't understand where physical stuff and digital stuff merge. Like that concept is really hard to understand.
Yeah.
And the thing is that there are a number of technologies coming together into the metaverse that will basically they're laying the platform of capabilities, right? So we're talking about, obviously, Web3 was one of the ones that we had a little bit of time to discuss in the previous chat. But we have things like blockchain, we have, NFTs, we have AIs, we have, and engines that are rendering things that are not even possible to imagine, and much more. So it feels like this new technology that is being built, it's actually going to leverage a next generation kind of computational, I would say, world that we're not really ready to fully understand, right? And some people even say all of it will make sense when we have quantum computing, because then the speed of data and transition will be so great that you could get very realistic and we'll all be confused by that. So what's your take on that?
I think we're at the stage right now with the metaverse where, I mean, I think the example you gave is spot on. So Facebook's view of the metaverse is like, it's like Rec Room or something. It's just like people, avatars like walking around, but having the same, why wouldn't we just use Zoom for that? Like it's way easier. You don't get anything out of the spatial situation there if you're just having a meeting. Right. So the times where you do get something spatial is when you are you're interacting with something that actually has volume. You move around it. You're walking, right? So if you have to teleport, that's a good sign that this is an overworked interface. If you're playing like a game or you're again walking through a space, then those types of avatars and things like that make sense. But I say this, none of us have almost really any experience with this at all. We built this place soft, so we could start to explore with that. And I tell you, we learned more within, a week of having started that than we could have ever read about. And nobody knows it. Nobody has written this down. And so when part of what we did, and you were asking about like our methods and stuff like that, part of what we did is like, well, what is the inverse of that? What's the opposite of what everyone is thinking? And so right now everyone's thinking like, we're going to create digital worlds that are good replicas of the physical world. And what we're trying to do is create a physical world that's a good replica of the digital world, right? It's you come into a physical space, you walk around, like you can touch people, you can hear things, and it's augmented in a way that you normally wouldn't find in a store or a room or something like that. And some of the things that we figured out were about how to keep people like in that space without having them actually crash into a wall. Yeah. And using the sort of affordances that you have, normally you don't walk into a window, you don't walk off a cliff. So right. Let's do that, right? So we put those types of digital, images to keep people still thinking that, feeling that they're in a digital world, while keeping them, from again crashing into each other or a wall or walking, tripping over something. We learned things about like how, so an affordance we're very familiar with in the physical world is a button. If you see a button, it only does one thing. It gets pressed, and then whatever happens is different. But you don't need to create sort of new metaphors for stuff that people already know how to use. But we're still in that transitional period. So at some point, other gestures, maybe snap your fingers twice will mean, take me out of this world or something. But those gestures haven't been invented yet. And so what we're doing is kind of having a sandbox for future again, affordances, gestures, behaviors, functions, and stuff like that. And as far as we know, I don't know if anybody else, few exceptions basically, are trying to do that.
Right. No, it's really interesting. You're touching upon a lot of interesting areas. I think you always half an hour is too little time. I have to kind of squeeze so many stuff into it. But anyways, the idea, I'm absolutely agreeing with you. I believe that the physical spaces in itself are the ones that are being shaped. It's not the digital space. The digital space, it's always being, it will continue to be something that is kind of unpredictable and big. But we need to take it back to what's in it for us. How can we live within this new reality, and what does it mean? And it's really interesting. If you ask a small young person right now, what would you be the sort of the gesture for answering a phone? They will do this, right? Because that's the thing. If you ask an older person, they will do that because how we used to look when we were kids, right? So this is changing. So we for instance, similar to what you guys are doing, we play with these concepts about ideas like, what if you want to tap into the digital world? What gesture would you use? And so people will like, not your head twice, like that's it. It's just like, I'm kind of like touching my Neuralink connection to the cloud. And so you tap into another thing. Interface design is going to change probably, because then you have a completely different element that is going to kind of connect you individually. Now we are connected to the internet through these devices, right? We are in a way, and the interface is still the same. So we try to touch stuff. Now we're starting to talk to it. And then these things are starting to kind of like see us and understand us. And so what I'm going to throw a hard one here for you, but it's interesting. I don't know, there's this whole thesis around metaverses where it says metaverses are nothing but the amplification of human personality. And that's why there are going to be many. And so each metaverse is going to be sort of like a person that you talk to. So, but in essence, it feels like it's an artificial intelligence that has an underground technology or technologies that allow you to do something very specific with a personality. That's the oversimplification of the metaverse, right? So if that's the case, I think the closest thing I've gotten to is to see in Japan, buildings have a mascot. And so mascot is actually part of the brand of the building, and people reference the building with a personality and a mascot. Do you think that's going to be the future that we're talking about? Do you feel that can we take it that simplistic, or this is going to be completely different?
Well, I think I think metaverses, is that you said, like, that is probably that's the key thing here. And again, the sort of the inertia, what's gotten us here, has been like Facebook, Google, Amazon. These are massively consolidated enterprises, right? They are some of the biggest, most powerful companies that have ever existed on Earth. But it was not very long ago, historically speaking, that they were scrappy little startups, right? Or Uber was also like, oh my God, it's so cool, it's like this. So the time from going, from being like, dorm room garage startup to global, threat to democracy is really short. And they are thinking inertially that they will be like Facebook's metaverse will be sort of a default, the same way that Facebook is a default. But if you go back to like AT&T and Telefonica, and so they were the ones that had this idea of creating, what we were, in the early 90s seeing is like, this is going to be like the cyberspace.
Right.
So metaverse and cyberspace, think of them as like they're synonyms, they're just 30 years apart, right? And they had this idea, since they were national telephone companies, and they dominated all the communication that wasn't television broadcast. They thought that this was just, they were just going to get it for free, basically. And all these other companies were called OTTs, and they still are, actually, over the top. So these are companies that provide content over the top of the network. And for 30 years, the telecoms have just been infuriated at how these people make so much money on their copper, their wires, right? And give them essentially nothing for it. So now there's another OTT, right? These metaverses are going to build on top of this infrastructure that we've got. It might be DWeb, it might be some other thing, but our experience building Soft is that building these worlds is about like building a web page. It requires extremely little talent or skill. There's libraries, there's tutorials, there's whatever. And so if the same way that like these telecom giants didn't create the portals in the world that we used, we had the web instead, and it was this proliferation of creativity and chaos and whatever. And then it took about 30 years to kind of simmer down and consolidate. We're just at a new initiation point for that. And so we have no idea. VR is just the like one single way to get into this. And brain computer interfaces, haptics, like tactile interfaces, like spatial interfaces, like rooms that you can move around in. These are all going to be what the metaverse really, how we touch it, how we experience it. But the content itself, I think we'll have as many personalities, to go back to your initial thing. The same, we have many emails for different things, like this is for your friends and family, this is for the bank people you never want to call. You will have different personas and different metaverses that you sort of move between.
It's crazy. It's interesting. You just confirm your theory, how you do your research, because I thought about it like backwards, thinking like, how many PO boxes would you have? Maybe you have your home, your business, but in the old days it was just one, and maybe there was one for many people, right? So now we have emails. Now there are no cyberspace, but cyberspaces, and now we have brands, platforms, ecosystems. There's like so many layers that we're kind of losing track, right? It's interesting. It's difficult to then kind of like do a research, because I mean, what you guys do is interesting. You looked at the past, and you sort of see the trends, and you look at what's going on right now. But that part for me is overwhelming. The what's going on right now, it kind of blows my mind away on the amount of data that is being created. And you mentioned the facts. I mean, these companies sit on enormous amount of data, and they're creating this really huge open source, because they themselves, having the budgets and the resources that they have, they say, we're not going to be able to figure this out, so we're going to open source. The most known one is OpenAI with the GPT version. I heard, like, I think Microsoft announced Megatron, horrible name. So what are these super massive dataverses, I call them? Should patent it. How are these big dataverses going to kind of influence the way? And you mentioned politics and social and so on. It's going to change our future. I almost feel we're on the verge of a dramatical social and cultural change, but no one knows, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the way. So I think this kind of aligns to what you were talking about. So we talk about the interspecies metaverses, And by that, we mean, so we have our plantiverse thing where these plants with sensors generate plants, and it looks, it's beautiful art. And the fact that it's made by a plant, also kind of cool. And there's all this like research into whale song and stuff like that, that I think that we will get more type of, interspecies things. But the biggest species that we're already interfacing with is algorithms or robots, whatever you want to call those things. So as you say, with GPT-3 and things like that, again, they barely work. They're kind of crappy, but they're improving at a very, very, very rapid rate, much more quickly than we are. And so when I was saying, like, you'll sort of send your personas out into these different metaverses to do different things, and they will largely be generative based on some aspect of your state, your physiology, your personality, whatever you need to get done. But I think like in the movie Her, where I don't want to spoil it, but like, so there's a scene at the end. There will be, greatly outnumbered by these sort of augmented parts of our identity. And that sounds really mystical, but that's already what we're doing. Right? Yeah. We already have more careers in a lifetime than any generation before us. We go on trips, we see people, we have more friends. Like, we just are augmented humans compared to previous generations. So you have to think, what's the augmentation of us look like next?
This is so big because it touches everything, right? It touches like first of all, you can see now how the impact affects world events, like how banking is actually being disrupted by cryptocurrencies and different tendencies and trends, but also they still very solid because it's the foundation of our economy. So when that gets threatened, kind of like the other metaverse dies, like that. So they're all interlinked and so on. But it's really the beginning of that change, right? I see that if you're educating children these days, you're not preparing them to be an engineer, or you're not preparing them to be an architect or whatever, or a musician. It's their pace of learning and their sort of from 0 to 100 can be so quick that they could really easily decide, okay, I don't want to be a musician. I want to just, sing for flowers. And that actually could be a job in the future, right? The same way if somebody told me in the 90s that you would be paid by just posting photos of yourself, I would have not believed that, right? So, and when we see things like, okay, I'm going to be, my love is to be singing to flowers, and that's going to be my job. And that could actually be a real thing, because you guys, you're extracting personality points from the data that you get from the plants. But I can see very, very short, in a short period of time, that your plantaverse will become, these plants will have characters. They can be longer than when they live in the real world. So why not let them become intelligent? I know it's scary, but why not? And if they can actually develop a personality, they will become humans, and in a way that they live only on the digital world. But what if you get to a point that's it? That is your moment, yeah. So it's interesting because the change is going minute by minute, or even second by second, almost in certain situations. And what do you think is going to happen to society when this whole thing comes into place? What could be the good and the bad? Let's try to have it, because it's for some people scary. For other people, it's not scary, but it's also interesting to know. So it really depends on which photo of the.
Yeah. Okay, well, so I'll just say, also going back to like historical trends in when a new thing comes along, it initially always causes utopia, and then it later causes dystopia, and then at some point it doesn't matter and a new thing comes along. And we're at the point right now with most metaverse kind of ideas are more on I would say still on the utopian side. Facebook's involvement, I think, because social media has gone from being utopia, anybody can talk to anybody, to dystopia, all the sort of sentiments that everybody has about Facebook right now are not very good, but it's actually not specific to Facebook, right? We always do this with technologies. So television was going to be this like revolutionizing thing, and then television was a vast wasteland. It always happens. So right now with the metaverse, I think the utopias that we're talking about is really a humongous increase in the ways that we can experience things, and that's very vague. I'll use a historical example. Like with movies, initially movies, they would just put a camera in a theater and film a play.
Yeah.
And then they realized I can do a close-up. I can have, like one really famous example, they put a camera on at some train tracks as the train was pulling into the station, but they zoomed in. So it looked like the train was really close. And so in the theater, the train is coming like this, all into the screen, and people in the theater they freaked out. They ran out because they'd never seen something like that. We're learning that visual language right now for three-dimensional worlds. And why be three-dimensional? Why confine ourselves to the types of spaces we usually do? So I think with the Fortnite examples, where you have like the singer is 700 meters tall and it's just like really intense, it's kind of like Burning Man meets something in some other galaxy. Those types of things will be like just movies. They, so constantly creating these new ways to switch your senses, to give you make you have just a tingle of agoraphobia at the same time you're hearing some pleasant music, like all that type of creativity. We're just starting to scratch the surface of.
It's amazing. I mean, I find it incredible. Again, we could speak hours about this topic, and I don't want to get political or anything like that, but there's always this fear that, am I going to exist? My profession will exist in the future. No, to me, I think my answer is no. I think all of us are likely to disappear in terms of what we believe is a profession right now, because it's a constant change that actually generates it has different consequences. And I fully agree with you. A lot of people are then feeling like really afraid of, like, if you're going to take my job and I'm not going to make ends meet, what's going to be my life? And then some people say, well, there will be universal income, and then some other people say, but that has never worked. So all of these different things are coming to a point that it's a great debate. I think that's fantastic that is happening. But regardless of the policies or anything, technology continues going in a way that we can't stop, and it's just not going to stop. It's just that the trajectory is being set. So that having said, we can go many directions from this opening, but you're exploring retail.
Right.
So let's look at retail in the moment. So I agree with you 100%. I had a failed startup that was looking into creating immersive spaces in retail. I think we were ahead of our time. Because we came in the beginning of the retail crisis thinking we can save the retail, but it turns out maybe retail needs to die somehow, or a new form needs to be explored, right? So tell us about soft. So tell us about what would that be, that goal? Like why are you exploring retail?
So soft, the stands for the store of future things, and it builds in a couple different threads. So back when we were at Telefonica, we were working on a project called autonomous commerce. And that's basically what happens when, last mile delivery turns into sidewalk robots. What happens when Alexa knows when the milk is ready, to be replenished before you do. And when we usually talk about those use cases, what we were doing was looking at the even the microeconomic rationale for those use cases. So if you look, for example, at something like, let's call it, the functional shopping, things like going to the grocery store to get food for the week, picking up the cleaning and stuff like that. The amount of time that takes is roughly about 8 hours per household per week. That time is almost exclusively done by women. It's the unpaid labor that we always talk about. So it's a huge social cost. And there's near zero pleasure value from that. I mean, maybe you like picking out the produce and things like that, but most of the stuff, again, if you break it down, you can say, okay, this is worth, let's say, to an average family on the order of $2,000 to $4,000 a month. Okay, depending on your income and your blah, blah, blah. It's a lot of money people are spending that they just don't see. The carbon footprint of all of that travel is ridiculous. So, 10 families go to the store, 10 families drive back home. If you have one delivery truck that just drops off everybody's groceries, you have like 1/7 as much emissions. Again, depending a little bit on the topology and stuff like that. But it's a vast reduction. Electric vehicles and all that stuff can't compare to the changes that autonomous commerce can bring. So retail is the problem. if you look at supply chains upstream of retail, like from the, from the fields and the mines into the store, it's super optimized. Everything is 80-90% utilized. There's very relatively little waste. All the waste is plowed back into something economical. Then you get to stores and you have things that stand on a shelf for weeks or months. You have billions, even trillions of dollars of stuff just waiting for somebody to maybe come in and buy it. And if you only knew what households needed what, you could release, like, again, I'm not exaggerating, trillions of dollars of value that's currently tied up in these poorly designed warehouses where, women have to go and work for no money.
Right.
So that's the thing where when we talk about the metaverse, I think of it as it's not just this 3D experience, it's more like the digital twin of our homes and our jobs and our banks and stuff like that, that can essentially be the 3 or 4 hours ahead of real-time model of what's needed, and then really optimize that last bit. So that's where a lot, I think, the big value creation will come from.
Yeah, I agree fully. And I think it's the right approach to try to find first a space where you can experiment. Because it's difficult to predict what kind of experiences people will actually be willing to go into, and which will die. So we have the Amazon Go example, and one Amazon Go is the most boring experience. You almost feel like you're stealing somebody. You go in, you grab your stuff, and you leave, and like, is it for real? This just happening? Okay, I think. That is probably even going to disappear, because it will be a point where I can just communicate what I want and what I need, and maybe my shopping experience is something that's just going to vary, but it's not going to change. It will get delivered to your house. So, in a sense, you're describing that the big supermarkets and sort of that utilitarian part of the story, it's probably going to start to transform and die in a way, right? So, what happens to all the publicity and advertising that goes into this space within the other space? Would be starting completely a new era of how we communicate the values of products. How is that? What do you think?
Well, this shouldn't be a surprise. We've already seen this movie twice, like with bookstores and record stores and like other stores. So these were there were certain product attributes that made it kind of pointless to keep this in a store. There are other products like dog food that was too big and heavy to really ship home conveniently, and so this is not all about like user preferences. It's about the fundamental economics of supply chains, and the only things that are left when you get the weight and volume economics of distribution of physical goods, the only things that are left that you want to go physically someplace else is where you want to be together with other people. So it's like fun shopping for, I don't know, your wedding dress or your, I don't know, something fun. I don't know. I guess I don't think anything is fun to shop for. And the things that are experiential. So entertainment, right? And social. So back to the thing, that's what, I said our stores, like, think of it as the inverse of the digital metaverses. It's also the inverse of like the Gorillas or Glovo or Lulu, like these little warehouses, micro warehouses they have in neighborhoods. And it's a place where you really only go to have that social part of the interaction. And then, you can buy things and you make that happen too. But just distilled to its essence, that's what it is. Where do you need a physical experience in a social space together physically with other people? That, I think, is what retail has been striving for with these experiential stores, but they haven't taken away all the crap of the actual inventory in that store.
I mean, we have to talk about this in depth, because I have had so many conversations with banks, supermarkets, fashion brands, and it's amazing. I mean, the kind of things that people get and the things that they try to do, right? It's absolutely crazy. One of the bullets, it's way too much for this chat, by the way. This is really cool, Mark. All of this is like really great stuff. But I'm gonna just step into one of the things that you commented. I think for everybody's kind of obvious that experiences are going to change, but we know that experiences are based on user data, and that's the part where it becomes interesting. Right now, data is being extracted from devices, essentially, but we contribute to that extraction. And typically that extraction is a digital twin that does not represent nothing of what we really are. Yeah, so Your personality in Instagram is not you. Your personality in Facebook is not you. Your personality in Google is not you. Your personality of Amazon is not you, or even the Netflix personality. There are so many elements, and the fans are trying to put it all together. How far do you think we're going to get to a point where we can just plug our bodies, physical bodies, into the metaverse and download our data and get paid for it?
I'm skeptical to the idea that we get paid for our data. I mean, because we've done experiments on that, and it's just not worth that much. And the thing is, so again, we've been taught. I hate that phrasing. There are a lot of people who are like, Facebook's becoming a billionaire off your data, right? And is stealing it from you because you didn't get permission. And I'm not trying to defend their behaviors or whatever, but I'm also not trying to. What I'm trying to say, like, do you know anybody who's actually been harmed by that? Is there stuff that you bought that you didn't mean to buy because you were like nudged into that? Like, whatever that cost is? If you say, well, would you rather just turn it off? Okay, don't use Google. You would be incapable of operating in modern society, right? And so if you went to somebody, again, going back historically, you said, hey, you can take your $600 Garmin GPS navigator, you can take your clunky ass Nokia phone, and you can do all this, and for $1,000 I'm going to give you $1 million worth of hardware. I'm going to give you free services, no more encyclopedia, no more maps, newspapers free, music all you want, subscribe to Spotify. Like you think I am a god. It's a divine ability, right? So when you think about the future, spoil the crap out of your user, give them everything they want, even though you have no idea how you're going to give it to them, and that's probably going to be closer to reality. Then, like, again, we Facebook is in a dystopian moment. I don't know of anybody who's actually been hurt. I mean, I know that there are blah blah blah, but it's not I don't worry too much about it. So
Oh, it's pretty cool. I mean, that was exactly the point I want to get to. And I mean, this is kind of like an opening to, we're going to have a third chat. We're going to have many talks because we're running out of time. And so it's really, really extremely interesting, Mark. And I mean, what you just said is interesting. We looked at data a lot, and we looked at, where we're as a company and professionally, we are in the space of data generation, right? So we know that the value comes when it's clustered and when it's actually aggregated, and we know that there are consequences. It can be weaponized, and we've seen social problems and politics and so on. But still, that what I'm surprising is that you don't deny the fact that we're going to be able to plug and download that data. That's what I loved. That you didn't say, oh, then it's actually going to happen. So Mark, this has been really, really wonderful so far. I have one last question. I mean, there's a lot of questions. I think this is going to be watched by a lot of people, and we're going to have to do multiple, perhaps another one at least. Maybe a roundtable could be an interesting thing to do. If you were to look into, let's say, if you want to give advice to future students or people that are starting to learn, explore this space, where should they go? What should they read? What would you recommend for someone that says, like, I have no idea what the metaverse is? I've heard Bitcoin, I've heard NFTs, I've heard AI, blah blah blah. I heard Meta as a company, and I see VR goggles. Like, why everybody's talking about this crazy stuff? Where do you begin?
I would, I don't think there's, how should I put this? Most of the stuff right now is being written for a specific audience and time with a very, very, I would say, narrow perspective, and you'll get all of that you need. I would look for something that is an older prediction, like, or an older sort of like view of not just cyberspace. So don't just go read Snow Crash or Neuromancer or something like that. So the 80s, 90s books that are about what sort of kind of what we're building now. I would do something that was maybe in a different space, because it gives you a lot of, I want to say, humility about like how very often these predictions are right and how they seem amazing and astounding to the people at the time, and then you're like, yeah, that's just normal though. right? And because a lot of this sort of breathless, like how the future world is going to be and stuff like this, it's going to feel very, very normal. And it's because, we're all not only early adopters, we're like innovators, we're the people that are building this world. So we're kind of into all the crazy ideas and where it could go. But like by the time it hits early majority and sort of like mainstream consumers, again, they'll have superpowers like we do with our phones and like the computers gave us before that and the TVs gave us before that and the radios before that. Like they'll give us what we currently think of as divine powers, and people will take that as normal, and they will like gripe about the food on the Virgin Galactic flight to the moon and how there's no space up above the overhead bins. And, when you turn 300, then your Social Security kicks in or something. Like we just complain about divine rights that we're constantly given. And that's just what humanity does. We invent amazing things and then we sort of accept it as normal and then we invent the next thing.
Absolutely. So you have to write a book then.
Okay. Yes. Old media. Write a book. I can't just do a YouTube thing.
Perfect. Yeah. Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great talking with you too.
Congrats the work that you guys are doing. I said it again. I said it to Ceci. I said it to you. It's funny we meet in this venues. Now we have to see face to face and probably have a drink. Hopefully not a digital drink, but a real one.
Yeah, we'll work on that too.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a really, really cool day, right?
You too. Thanks.